Awesome. Good afternoon. We are going to go ahead and get started with our spring administration training for the RISE assessment. If at any time you have questions, you're welcome to come off of mute. You can drop them in the chat. We have other members of our USBE team here, as well as members from CAI, our vendor for the RISE assessment, who are with us as well. So if we're not answering your questions with our slides, go ahead and come off mute again or drop them in the chat and we'll help you with anything that we can. My name is Elise Fry. I am the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with USBE. The volume is very low. Tyson, I just turned things up and got closer to my mic. Is it a little better now?
So Elise, you're muted.
There we go. All better. Thanks, Christine. Okay, so we are going to look at the RISE portal today. We're going to go over the specifics for the summative administration, which if you have been doing any benchmarks or interims, they are so similar that it's going to be really nice for you. We're going to look at the test appeals process, as that appeals process is specifically for LEA level users. And then hopefully you can then take all of this information back, conduct the trainings within your own LEA if you need to, those types of things, and then provide any support. Terlin, yes, the PowerPoint will be shared later by Emily Ng through Midas. Anyone who registered will get the PowerPoint later on. And as usual, this is also being recorded so that we can post it to our YouTube channel and you can refer back to it at any time. So just as a reminder for RISE availability, the benchmarks and interims are currently available and will continue to be available. All interim assessments, though, need to be completed and submitted by the end of the day on March 3rd. So just be aware of that, as that deadline is coming up. So if you have schools who are working on those interims, we want to get those submitted soon. Any expired interim assessments cannot be reopened after this date. So if you have any that are requiring a test appeal, make sure that all of those are done prior, because they won't be available after March 3rd. The benchmarks, though, remain available through the end of your school year for most, if not all of you, because those are available through June 9th. Okay. The mid-year summative tests are well underway, if not already completed, for many of you who participate in those. Please note that any incomplete mid-year summative tests are going to force complete if they are not submitted by students on or before March 3rd. Okay. For the spring summative administration, your LEA has 8 weeks within the state testing window to complete the testing. We do not recommend testing the last week of your school year, as there are many interruptions, other unintended circumstances which tend to creep up. So just take that into consideration as you are setting your windows. I've included a link to the AD resource guide here if you need more guidance on setting those windows or when the windows can occur. The testing windows can be edited at any time by LEA administrators. So LEAs can create a test window for schools that need to test outside what would be like your normal LEA window, like if you have year-round schools. Or if you don't want a test to be available, you can assign start and stop dates in both the past and the future so that it restricts the availability. The nice thing with that is it makes it so that summative tests are not administered in error, as tends to occur if we just leave things open. When creating your test windows, just make sure that everything falls entirely within the state testing window. And again, please do not test during the last week of school unless there's dire circumstances. If something occurs, you would need to have USB approval to do that on that last week anyway. And you can contact myself and Kim Rathke, our testing and data coordinator, if that type of situation arises, but we obviously hope that it doesn't. If you have not registered for the RISE portal updates, you'll want to do that. Doing this gives immediate updates for outages, updates to resources, things like that. It allows you to stay informed and receive updates whenever an announcement or a resource is published. Once you've registered, you'll receive like a confirmation email that you've enrolled. You'll be notified via email whenever a portal announcement is made. And you can just do that by clicking the little subscribe for update bar that's on utahrise.org, just on the main page. So going on to the secure browser is required for administering summative assessments. Instructions for installation are included in the technology resources link that's found in the resources section of the RISE portal. We're going to look at the resources more closely here in a bit. The RISE secure browser needs to be installed on all devices prior to students taking any summative test. And you'll want to make sure that you refer to any of the supported browsers before updating systems, because we don't want any system updates to interfere with the usage of that secure browser. There are troubleshooting guides for various operating systems in the tech resources that are provided on the portal as well. But if you have specific issues on a device, you'll want to reach out to your technology specialist. As a heads up, we also recommend not using the auto update option for devices, purely because it doesn't always ensure that the operating system can be supported. So now we're going to talk about our training tests. Why training tests? I just want to have a little quick discussion with those of you who have experienced them. What are you seeing or not seeing? Go ahead and come off mute, drop experiences in the chat. Why do you think that training tests are a good thing, or why would we want to use them?
To get used to the kind of questions and the kind of tests, the tools.
Definitely.
To help with anxiety?
For sure.
We use it for kids to practice how to flag things, how it's going to be when they sign out and submit, those kinds of
Perfect.
things, how to
Yes.
use the read aloud tools and those kinds of things.
To practice the procedures.
Yep. Great comments in the chat too, definitely. The biggest thing is it's the best way to familiarize ourselves and our students with the functionality of the system, with the various item types. Administration procedures was mentioned, as well as using the global tools. Sometimes we forget that those exist, or that students may or may not know how to use them. The other nice thing is it allows you to ensure local technology configurations are validated to ensure that the test can even be administered to begin with. Okay, students are able to familiarize themselves with those global tools in a really low stakes environment. And it's just good to give training tests in all presented content areas as well, because some of them have tools that are not included in other tests. For example, like the calculator or the lack of calculator in the elementary math ones, that they can still use them on a science test, but they're not there in a math test. It just is really great so that they know what's going to be available on multiple different types of tests. Okay. When you go to administer training tests, they're provided through the RISE portal. They don't require a login credential. If you haven't taken a training test yet, I would recommend taking some time following this training and just use the guest user access that's provided, because this is going to give you a similar experience to what teachers and students experience. It only takes about 10 or 15 minutes. It's not a great big suck of your time. If you're looking at them for The first time with students, it does take a little bit longer as you kind of orient yourself with where tools are and how they work. But really, once they familiarize themselves and once you familiarize themselves, the process is really quick. Just as a heads up though, with those training tests, the science tests may take a little longer than that 10 to 15 minutes as they use the cluster formatting with multiple questions using the same stimulus material. And sometimes that gets, it takes some getting used to for students to use. You may notice there are two different ways to take a training test. So the training test option is public. That's where you can just take a really quick one with a guest login. It's really simple. For this option, you select the training tests option without a proctor and you just sign in. This is great for teachers and staff to familiarize themselves with what the platform looks like if they're new. It can also be used as an informative tool with parents as well, just if there are any questions about what it all looks like. You can then also administer the training test in a testing session. This mirrors the RISE process more closely because it requires SSID login credentials. For students, it requires a valid session ID provided by the teacher, as well as using the secure browser. These are far more useful when prepping for test administration because using the RISE login credentials just better mirrors the RISE summative process. If you've been taking advantage of the interim assessments or the benchmark modules, you've also been able to practice this login process as well. If you choose to try this experience, be sure to select the test administration option in the preparing for testing section. Using this option also allows you to verify accommodations, which can be set for students needing those services. And we'll go into more detail about the accommodations later, but just know that those need to be set for students prior to students signing into the browser. Okay, those again, accommodations need to be set within the Tide system before students log in if you want them to have access to them. Once you get past the login page, from there, you'll be able to select your grade level, as well as the content of the training test you wish to take. It's important to note that the training tests are grade banded. The content is not single grade specific. The purpose is to become familiar with the system itself and the tools provided, not necessarily content mastery. Okay, so it's important to help students and teachers understand that content mastery is not the purpose of a training test. So not being familiar with what is currently presented in the question isn't what we're worried about. We're worried about, do you know where to find the dictionary? Do you know where to click on the calculator if you were to use it? As I mentioned before, if you're using training test, the test administration piece, you'll be able to verify accommodations and ensure resources are applied and working correctly. Again, once accommodations or resources have been assigned and tied to individual student accounts, students will sign in with their username or SSID for any form of administration, whether it be practice or not. And you can verify this with this particular screen, even on the training test, being able to see if various settings have been set to a student account or not. An enhancement we are really excited to share with you today is that the training test will include Spanish adaptive functionality starting next Tuesday. It is scheduled to go live on the RISE platform next Tuesday, so following President's Day weekend. Guidance for accessing the training test with Spanish enabled is going to go as follows. So you'll go to the training test sign in, select your grade. This is going to be available for math or science. It is not available for ELA, okay? And then in the choose settings screen under presentation, you'll select Spanish from the language drop down. Okay, again, this is only for the training test. It will be different for the summative assessment, and we'll go over that as well. But I wanted you to be aware of this training test enhancement. From this point on, once you select Spanish in that drop down, the screen's content is going to switch to the Spanish language. And then students are going to be able to toggle between Spanish and English content after entering the training test using the change language toggle button, which will become part of the global tools menu in the upper right corner. Again, this tool is only going to be there if Spanish was selected as the language on the training test dropdown. Okay. Also, when we get to the summative piece, this little piece is only going to be available if you've applied the Spanish adaptive version accommodation in Tide, and we'll look at that later. Okay. So really quickly, it's important to note that the use of the Spanish adaptive functionality on a Windows device is going to require the use of the Spanish voice pack. So it will need to be installed on your devices. You'll want to complete the steps to verify that it's been completed using the Spanish Mexico option that would be on a Windows device. As far as we know, this is not a requirement on Chrome devices or on Mac devices. This is a Windows specific little piece that would need to be taken care of before you try to access the training test or the summative test with the Spanish adaptive functionality. Before we move on to other RISE resources, do we have any questions on RISE availability with our Windows, the training tests, or the functionality of the Spanish adaptive version within the training test specifically, or the secure browser? Tyson, you're welcome to come off mute if you want to ask your question, or you can drop it in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, because I had a few questions for our person who's in charge of the RISE testing, just making sure that we can all be on the same page. And one of my questions to her was in regards to how was this test translated? Was there a specific person who is basically a professional in translation, or how was this translated? Did we use some type of application for those test questions?
Tyson, that's a great question that I am not sure of the answer. Eric with CAI, do you know the answer to Tyson's question? Like how is it translated?
Sure, yeah. So we actually send them off to a third-party vendor professional service, and then they go through and have translated each item that was selected for those tests. So it's a third-party company that does it for us.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That answers my question in regards to how it was translated. Thank you.
Awesome. And then I see in the chat, there's a question, the adaptive language is not an accommodation. Is that correct? Okay, so for the training test, it is not set as an accommodation. For the summative test, you will set it like an accommodation, and we do have some guidance for students who this would be a good tool to use that accommodation for, and we'll get to that when we get to the summative setting. Okay. Another question, benefits of using the benchmark module previewing in addition to or replacing of training? Definitely not replacing. Benchmark module previewing is, Catherine, is for teachers only. It is not intended to be used with students. That is so that teachers can look at what's on a specific benchmark and make like instructional decisions prior to administration. Yep, no problem. Any other questions before we jump to our resources? If something comes up, drop it in the chat or come off of mute, and we can always kind of journey back here a little bit. So now we're going to take a closer look at the other RISE resources and systems that are available to you in the RISE portal. Here's a quick overview of what each of these separate sections provides. You'll see there are 5 different tabs to choose from, along with an abbreviated version of what you'll find or be able to do in each of the sections. We will not be looking at the benchmark module previewing tab today because we're focusing on summative administration, but I just wanted you to be aware that it's there, but we're not going to look at it today. We're going to start with resources at the top. The resources tab houses the tech resources that we previously mentioned, as well as other helpful user guides like the Tide user guide, the test administration manual, as well as the RISE reporting guide. All 3 of these documents are helpful to use before, during, and after testing. While they are available online, you can print certain sections for ease of reference, for example, the scripts at any time, but they're accessible there for you online. To find these 3 helpful documents as well as the others, you just select the user guide folder under Browse. Again, there are lots of other available resources that you can browse through, like the benchmark module directory, writing rubrics, tech resources that we touched on at the beginning, things like that. But we're going to focus on the available user guides since they're the bread and butter for our test administration with the summative test. So here's a TIDE user guide overview. The TIDE user guide is really helpful before testing, as it's where you will edit or modify any user accounts, create or edit any user-defined rosters. As a friendly reminder, no changes can be made to the system-defined rosters, as those are automatically created with the Utrecht sync. However, you can create your own rosters for teachers who may be in a co-teaching experience, because the students are only going to roster to one teacher that they're originally assigned to. It's also nice if you're collecting data on a small group of students who may not be in the same class, so that it's just all in one place. Other important information you'll find in the TIDE user guide is guidance on adding accommodations, entering participation codes, the test appeals process. This functionality of approving test appeals is only available to school administrators or LEA level users, so just be aware of that as well. For the test administration manual, anyone who may be administering a summative test should read and familiarize themselves with the appropriate sections of the TAM that apply to their user role, especially since reading TAM scripts verbatim is required for a summative assessment. The TAM's designed to allow for printing by a specific role. So if you're a test proctor, you can just print the little proctor section, or for a test administrator as a teacher. Okay, teachers and proctors definitely don't need to print the whole thing, just the specific sections for their responsibilities as outlined can be printed. The last one we're going to review really quickly is the reporting guide. This helps give direction for interpreting scores, setting up reports so they make sense, as well as how to print student ISRs when the time comes, as parents do need to be notified within, I believe it's 3 weeks of test completion. So just really quickly, we're just going to do a quick quiz to just test how your knowledge is here. You can either come off mute or just drop your answers quickly in the chat. We're going to see if we remember where some of these important topics are found. So our first question, where can you learn about how to set student accommodations? Which one of our manuals does that? Yes, TIDE user guide. Thanks, Carolyn. Question number 2, which user guide provides required scripts for a test administrator? Thanks, Robin. Yes, that one's the TAM. Which user guide gives direction for viewing, editing, modifying user accounts? Adrian, great. TIDE, that's where it is. Which user guide helps you interpret writing scores? Reporting. Thanks, Robin. And then where can you find more information about reviewing and approving test appeals? Since that really applies to a lot of our audience here. Adrian, that's right. TIDE. Good job. You're all going to be masters now. So now that we've covered the resources, we're going to skip down to TIDE. When you first select the TIDE option, you're going to be prompted to log in with your credentials. And once you've done that, the landing page is going to look like this. The TIDE homepage reflects the stages of testing in the process itself. So you've got a preparing section, the administration section, and then the after. Note that the after testing, that blue section, is for LEA level users only. So if you're a teacher or a testing coordinator, you're only going to see the first orange and green sections. Permissions for accessing data and viewing other information in TIDE is determined by your user role. Okay, there are 6 different user roles within the system, and those 6 different roles have different permissions associated with them. This is just a sample screenshot from the TIDE user guide that gives you an idea of how those permissions break down. For example, an LEA administrator can perform tasks that are not available to a teacher level user. You can also see here that LEA and school administrators are granted more permissions than teachers or proctors. These permissions also limit the scope of data access. So a district level user can work with data pertaining to their district, individual schools within that district, as well as individual teachers, while a school level user can only work with data pertaining to their specific school, or a teacher is just their specific rosters. Above that landing homepage, there is a banner with other components to be aware of. Specifically, I want to draw your attention to number 5, as that's the inbox where any secure reports or other secure information is going to be sent. And it works just as a secure inbox, as it's going to contain student data, anything that appears there. If you need to access secure documents from that or the student data files that you've previously exported from Tide, you just click the inbox in that banner. And from the inbox, you can download or archive. You can also delete previously exported files from that inbox. Now we're going to look at each of these sections in just a little more detail, and we'll start with the preparing for testing, the orange section. Here you can view or edit user accounts as well as add new users. The student menu is going to allow you to access and edit student accounts as well as upload any student settings. You can create frequency distribution reports, which we'll go over a little bit later, but that allows you to filter by grade and then things like gender, scribe, color choice, assistive technology, things like that. When accessing student information, the results can be exported to your secure inbox that we talked about earlier. And this allows for larger result tables and can export in like an Excel file or a CSV file. This is just a demo student record that gives you an idea of what an individual student record might look like. The student information used to search is displayed at the top, while the student participation is displayed on the bottom. So you can view individual settings by clicking the little edit pencil icon that's on the left.
Did you see Mary's mom? Okay.
Clicking the icon is going to allow you to see assessments, benchmark modules that students have already completed, if there's a parental exclusion associated with that student, as well as view or set the student test settings and accommodations. This includes the new Spanish adaptive option, okay? And I know it's small print, but this is where you're going to use this, the series of drop-down menus and toggle switches to make any changes to assistance tools or presentation modifications like Braille, ASL, print on request, assistive technology, also any other accommodations that would be outlined in a student's IEP or their 504 documents. Accommodations are not uploaded through the Scram or Utrex syncs. These are all entered manually. Again, just through these little series of drop downs and toggle switches. And as I mentioned before, this is also where you will now be able to apply the Spanish adaptive version of the test. To apply the Spanish adaptive feature, you are going to need to select Spanish under the math and or the science test families individually and click save, because you can apply it for math specifically and or for science specifically. Okay, one, other, or both. Okay.
But that's going to be an accommodation, so needs to be an IP on a 504, or
It doesn't necessarily need to be in an IEP or a 504. It does need to be, you need to be able to include your EL team, definitely include parent input and student input. We are going to go over this specifically in pretty great detail tomorrow, also with our AD in our AD meeting, to give you some guidance on which students are going to best benefit from that. Janelle, yeah, I can show you how to get through the accommodation section again. It is just going to have to go back a couple of slides, so apologies for the dizziness. You start with students in that preparing for testing section. And then by searching the student, you'll click the little pencil next to the student's name. And that will take you to this screen where you can then set those accommodations. Okay. Can ELA directions be in Spanish, or is that locally provided? Oh, Trevor, I don't even remember. If you send me an individual,
Say that again.
I will look it up. Can the ELA directions be read in Spanish, or is that locally provided?
So like directions is in, like you can't do the test content.
Yeah, I have that same question as
What
Trevor.
what can be read in Spanish are the instructions to get the students into the test. And anything around the functionality of the test. And after that, it cannot be provided in Spanish on the ELA test.
Yeah.
But does the platform itself do that for you now that you have the Spanish option in
No,
ELA? No.
I
So
don't
you
think
still
for
have to
ELA,
locally
yeah.
provide that. Okay.
Not for ELA. The
Yeah.
ELA test is not provided in Spanish because it's testing English language.
Yeah.
But the math and science directions are provided in Spanish.
Elise, do you see Hillary's question?
I am looking at the chat right now.
It's only in Spanish. If you change it to Spanish, you're gonna see Spanish. So they don't see both. So my suggestion would be if you have a kiddo that kind of relies on both, I would maybe consider like a translation dictionary instead, does that make sense? Instead of choosing Spanish, I would definitely get them on and do a training test and see how the kiddos feel. You want to make sure that like the decisions being made for them are going to be in benefit to them and not what we as adults think is going to benefit them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
Okay, scrolling back through the chat questions here a little bit. Tyson says, I know it was mentioned a third party does this. Has anyone from the state tried the test as of yet? So Tyson, I have personally taken a couple of the Spanish tests. I will say I do not speak Spanish, but it works.
Okay, the reason why is because I speak Spanish, and so I deal with a plethora of different students, and where I had learned it was in Chile and things like that. And I know speaking with different students from different countries, sometimes they just mention to me like, hey, I just don't understand, so-and-so who's from here. I don't understand their vocabulary, and even simplistic words that I had learned in Chile can either mean something completely different in one country or derogatory. And so that was the reason why I was just asking to be able to see if the grammar too and the vocabulary was user-friendly, because I know sometimes some of my students will express to me like, hey, this doesn't make sense, or hey, this is not something that I typically say, or this is something really bad in my language. So that was the reason why I was asking to see the vocabulary, because I can understand, and especially when it was showing like the audio or the voice packages was going to be in Mexico. I know sometimes some of my students just don't understand whatsoever when they're speaking to someone from Mexico at all. They're just like, man, they're speaking too fast. I don't understand what they're saying. And then I have to kind of like, intervene and be able to say, okay, this is what they're saying, and much more. So sometimes there's that language barrier between other Spanish speaking countries and things like that.
Yeah, like Tracy said, I would just recommend trying training tests with them and see. The other thing that you could do within the settings, like when you go to set your training test, or when you're logging into the summative, there are a few different voice options, and one might be more of a similar dialect. So listening to the 3 or 4 options that are listed, I would also make that recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And then will there be like after trying it myself on Tuesday and getting some feedback from other students and things like that, will there be like a link or somewhere where we can leave in comments or suggestions and things like that for improvement of the test?
If you just want to send me a direct email, that would be great.
Okay, I will do that then too as well. Thank you.
Hillary, if we set them to Spanish, will that mean they only see the test in Spanish, or can they see both English and Spanish? They can see both. They will toggle between the two using that little earth globe, and we'll look at it again a little bit later. My experience was very seamless. That, like I said, I don't speak Spanish, but I took a test in Spanish, and I just toggled from Spanish back to English to answer the questions, and then toggled back.
So at least it's both. It's not just Spanish version. They can choose.
No, they can
in
choose
Spanish
back and
or
forth.
English.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
and they
I'm
can
sorry,
toggle right between them. So they can look at it in English, they can have it read to them in English, and then they can click the little Spanish earth button, and it will read to them in Spanish and show them the questions and the stimulus in Spanish.
So it will read to them in the Spanish. So
Yes.
it switches the language on the screen, and the screen reader will read the Spanish or the English.
Yeah. The only thing if I remember correctly, that didn't toggle back to English was if I were looking at a global tool, like if I were clicked into the notes or something like that, those directions stayed in Spanish.
Yeah, so at least I just add to that. So when you initially set the test to Spanish, you'll have the toggle for the item content, but for the tools and like all the background information, that is set to Spanish for the test. If you have the test set to English, there is no Spanish at all. So if you do have a student who might be that middle, you probably would want to set them to Spanish because they can always toggle the question back into English and read the translation that way. And I also put in chat the organization we use to translate and just what their philosophy is in terms of translating, which they do go for like a universal type of Spanish when they do the translation. So I do put that link in the chat as well.
Perfect,
Thanks,
thank
Eric.
you. And then just because I'm still scrolling through the chat questions, Terralyn and Rachel, hopefully that explains now better that yes, in summative, they will still be able to toggle between the English and Spanish.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, all right.
And this only can be made by administrators, right? The
I'm
change.
sorry, what, Omar?
Only the administrators can make the change to.
Yes, only administrators can make the change in Tide, and then the
coordination with-
student
okay.
can choose to toggle back and forth when they're within the testing platform.
I think it's phenomenal.
And just to clarify, the instructions will be only in Spanish, right? Not the entire test.
The entirety of the stimulus and the questions being asked do appear in Spanish.
Yeah, but not the content of the test.
The content of the test appears in Spanish
Okay,
for math and science.
math and science. Okay,
And then let's see here, 2 slides back. Let's see here, 1, 2, this one. Okay, so from here, again, you'll click the little pencil. And then in the presentation section, you can change the language. Ignore the Braille. You would click the Spanish option and you would need to do it in math and in science. Okay.
And does that feature have to have been used throughout the year before it can be used on the final assessment?
No. But I would definitely recommend using a training test before. All right, so once it is applied, this is what it's going to look like on a student screen. It's going to display the information in Spanish, and then the student can use the little earth to change the language button between Spanish and English. Okay. So these are our recommendations. Terralyn, this is going to answer your question. So when determining if Spanish, the adaptive recommendation, this is who we feel would benefit most from the Spanish adaptive version. It's just really important to note that the decision ultimately needs to be determined by the LEA's language services team with the support of parent and student preference. Okay, and again, we're going to talk about this tomorrow in our AD meeting as well, but this gives you an outline for who we feel would benefit most from the Spanish adaptive version of the RISE test. As another enhancement, which has been in place since fall, but I wanted to touch on it here, were the assistive technology forms. So if you have students who require the use of assistive technology or a scribe, you would need to make that request to USBE through Tide using the enhanced forms function. This will alert USBE and require approval. So on the Tide dashboard, you would click on forms in the preparing for testing group. And then on the next page, you'll select the type of form you want to submit, and you just select from the request forms as applicable to the accommodation being requested. And for assistive technology requests, you need to complete the form detailing the demographic information of the school, the detailed requirement of the accommodation, Anything with an asterisk is going to need to be completed before submission. So once you've completed the form, you need to agree that the accommodation is documented and used regularly with fidelity in class instruction. It has been attempted in training tests to ensure it functions as expected for the student who is going to be using it. Upon submission, a tracking identifier is going to be provided, and it's recommended that you save this just to easily track the status of your accommodation request. Okay. Note that once submitted, requests cannot be edited or changed. All right. The request is then going to be reviewed by USBE, and upon approval, we will be able to enable the requested accommodations. If you have any questions regarding these types of accommodations, you can contact Tracy Gooley, our special education specialist that works with RISE. Her email is there on the slide. Okay. Again, yes, these slides will be sent out later. And this is
Make one
recorded as well.
request on that one, Elise.
Yeah, go for it.
When in there and filling out those requests, if you have students that are using dictation or speech to text, please fill that out in the scribe request form and not the assistive technology request form, because the scribe form will help get to more of the questions that we need answered in that request form. So again, if they're using dictation or speech to text, which is an assistive technology, but it's tied to scribe, please fill out the scribe form.
Okay, thank you. All right. So this report, we're going to look at the frequency distribution report. It's available at the LEA or school level. It's going to show you the number of students that fall into a specific category. Again, once you generate one of these, it's going to be sent to your secure inbox that we saw in Tide. The results for these can be displayed in like a grid or a graph or a little bit of both. Okay. For rostering, the rostering tab allows you to search for pre-existing rosters. You can make them, you can edit them, you can delete any that were user defined. You can also view the system defined rosters. Remember that the system defined rosters cannot be edited because they are loaded through the Utrecht sync. If you're experiencing any rostering issues, you are welcome to reach out to our data specialist who also works with Utrecht. Her name is Maureen Rushing, and her email is also here on this slide. It's important to ensure that teachers who are testing have the correct students on their rosters prior to the actual test date. That way, if teachers elect to print those test tickets, they have accurate information. So just verifying those system-defined rosters prior to testing is super helpful. Participation codes are used by USBE for summative tests. The only exception to this is the parental exclusion participation code, which can actually be entered for any assessment like the benchmarks or the interims, not just the summative. So to update a student's participation codes, you will need to search for the student using the filtering options that are provided. The search result table is going to display students who match the search criteria that have been entered. Okay. The participation codes column lists any assigned participation codes. To add a code, you'll select the little edit pencil for the student whose participation code that you want to update. And then the edit non-participation code page is going to appear. Okay. You'll see the student information at the top, and then you can edit those codes using the drop-down menus that are available for each test that the student is eligible for. And you can update those participation codes as needed. If a student doesn't appear on a roster, you may want to check the parental exclusion status for that student, as the code may have already been applied, which then is going to kind of hide them from appearing on a roster because they're not eligible to take that test due to the participation code that's already been applied. Okay. Do we have questions for the resources, rostering, accommodations, participation codes? I'm going to open up the chat again so I can see Maureen's email. You bet. That. How do I interpret the roster class names? can you give me more information, like more detail? I don't quite understand your question.
So Lisa, she's doing that. And I know that I've emailed you several times, you and Tracy both, about the participation codes. If you have in this Utrecht system or in their IEP, it says standard administration for the test, but their IEP kind of conflicts where it says something else. Is there, I guess, if it says something that you have to mark in the TIDE system, in their accommodations, or sorry, in the RISE system,
Okay,
let's
so
say if it's like visual representation and math, that would be an example. That's another one that you can mark as an accommodation that's in their IEP, but it's available for us to mark in RISE.
So the way you're going to determine whether or not it's an accommodated form and it gets that 201 code, and I'm going to go through this tomorrow at AD meeting as well, is if you go to the TAM for UA Plus and RISE, there will be specific charts that outline accommodations. So if it's a resource that all students get, it's no longer an accommodated assessment, even if the IEP says that they should have it. Does that make sense? So like
Yeah,
the
I understand that. So like, yeah, I
So
get that part.
If it's in the list as an accommodation and the student uses it, then it gets marked accommodated. So visual representations is an accommodation for RISE. Extended time is not an accommodation for
yeah.
RISE, but it is for UA Plus. So if a student has it for UA Plus, they get coded accommodated. So
Okay.
in the slides tomorrow for AD meeting, I will specifically give you the page numbers.
No, I have the page numbers, Tracy. I just wanted
Yep.
to verify, but
So go to that chart, and if the students used anything that's listed in that as an accommodation, it becomes an accommodated test.
okay. I just wanted to
That makes
clarify.
sense.
But yes, thank you for answering that. And thank you for
Yep.
going over that tomorrow too. I'll be excited to hear it again.
You bet. And then I think there was one more question. Let's see. Do all accommodations have to be submitted and approved with the forms? So no, Bobby, great question. The only accommodations that you have to submit and be approved is if a student's using Scribe, if they're doing Braille, and if they are using any sort of assistive technology that infiltrates. So I at the state turn on either Scribe or assistive technology, which would include that speech to text component. So we like to be notified if you need large print so we can discuss what that looks like and possible options for the student. But those are the ones that require state approval.
Okay. Any other questions that would relate to our resources, rostering, accommodations, participation, before we move on to the actual testing process? Okay. All right, then we'll move on. This is a little before testing checklist kind of for you to go through. For information regarding the standard test administration and testing ethics policy training, you are welcome to contact Kim Rathke, our testing and data coordinator. It's super important as well to notify students of your electronic device policy, as no devices are going to be allowed during testing. If you're going to collect them, electronic devices would include, but are not limited to, like cell phones, smartphones, smartwatches, anything that's internet capable. The exception to this would be students who are monitoring their insulin with a device, okay, that would be outlined in their health plan. You'll want to print or queue up any necessary scripts so they're ready to go. You'll want to ensure that each device that students are going to be using is able to support RISE testing. This includes checking the secure browser, ensuring that keyboards and headphones are in working order, and making sure that all students have access to headphones so that they can listen to the testing resources or tools, as well as instructions, audio, anything that's presented through the assessment. Okay. You'll want to use training tests with students to help them prepare. You'll want to review those rosters as we talked about, and review the setting of accommodations to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students there. You'll want to be cognizant of the testing environment, like eliminate distracting noises. Do not play music during standardized assessments, even the nice, quiet, classical kind. Okay, you'll want to cover or remove materials that might provide hints or answers to questions. If possible, you may want to arrange the room to prevent students from viewing others' computer screens, all things you want to just kind of be aware of. As far as allowable materials go for RISE, headphones, scratch paper or graph paper, calculators as appropriate. They are not allowed in grades 3 through 5, and they're only allowed on section 2 of the Math 6 test. Okay, and there's an on-screen one that's provided. For grades 7 and 8, a handheld one that was used in class is appropriate. If you want any specifics there, there's pretty detailed instructions outlined in the manual. You can also contact Whitney, our math specialist, if you have a question on a calculator, or send one to me as well. For scratch paper, it's just that it's scratch paper. It can be blank, it can be lined, it can be graph paper, but it should not have any previously printed graphic organizer of any kind. Okay. If you're using blank graph paper, make sure that it has student's name on it and is kept secure between testing sessions, because students can still use the same piece of scratch paper from the day before. It just shouldn't leave your secure testing location. Okay. Just as with testing tickets, that any scratch paper is going to be destroyed, okay, at the end of your testing session. Teralyn, are there going to be specific transcript additions like we did for WIDA regarding electronics? The scripting in RISE, I do not believe is changing. At this point.
Nope, because that's a local policy that is part of it. We don't tell them they can't, and you're welcome to, as kids come in, to say, get rid of your electronic devices, but we're not going to add additional ones. We don't have the same issue with electronic devices with RISE that we do with WIDA.
Thanks, Kim. If you've elected to use testing tickets, there are 3 places that you can access them for printing. You can print from the student menu and the roster menu in that prep for test section. However, accessing the test tickets from those tables require a few more steps. The easiest way to do it is the print test ticket option that's in this green section for the administering tests section. It's just the easiest place to do it, because as soon as you click that, it takes you to this screen and you can just select the test tickets drop down. You'll see that you can print from a roster list where you'll be prompted to use the drop down menus for roster type, teacher name. It just creates a really quick, easy list. And from there, you just select the sections that you want to print test tickets for. The little printer icon will become available as soon as you click into a box. It remains kind of grayed out as not selectable until you select one or more of those courses. Okay. So now that we've kind of prepped for testing, we're going to look at monitoring our testing progress. There's 2 different views to be aware of with the administering test menu section. One that is more for admins and one that is the one that like your teachers will see. You'll notice the admin side has more options, as well as the option to make test appeal requests. And we're going to go over that later. But the other added components to the admin level view include test session status report and the test status code report. You'll want to actively monitor testing through all of your testing windows. Okay, the tasks available in the monitoring test progress test menu allow you to generate various reports that provide information about a test administration's progress. The following reports are available in TIDE. You can do a plan and manage testing report, which provides details as far as a student's test opportunities, the status of those opportunities. You can also generate that report from the plan and manage testing page. There's the test completion rate report, and we're going to look at that one separately in a minute. And then there's the test status code report, which displays all of the participation codes for a test administration. So you can create your own plan and manage testing report with your specific search criteria. This allows teachers or administrators or you as an LEA level user to generate a very customizable participation report to show student progress. So you fill out your LEA or school information and then drill down to your search. You can also search for individual students, or the drop downs under Get Specific allow you to drill down to certain components, which I think is actually really cool because by zooming in here a bit, you can see it provides you with the option to select by have or have not, completed, not completed, paused, close to expired. You can search by SSIDs or session IDs as well within this specific date range. Another participation port is the test completion rate report, and it summarizes the number and percentage of students who have started or completed a test. These items are all columns which appear in that report. So you've got your test, any LEA information, the students, how many have started, how many have completed, so that as you're going through, you kind of know how far along you are. Now we're going to move into the actual administration. As a reminder, the TAM is located in the resources section, but to open a testing session, you'll need to select the test administration system option that's from the RISE main page. These are the same 6 steps for any RISE test, whether it be benchmark module, an interim, summative, if you're choosing to do a training test through the secure browser. So if teachers have administered any of these, this is not going to look different, okay? 2 proctors are best for test security. They do not need to be certified teachers, but they do need to have gone through the appropriate ethics training. Be sure to have any materials ready, like the testing tickets, headphones, scratch paper, have your scripts ready, just because that provides the least amount of disruption to the actual administration if it's all set and ready to go. So now we're going to go step by step, screenshot by screenshot through the administration process. The first step in administering any test is to create the testing session. This should be done fewer than 20 minutes prior to starting the test session, just in order to prevent the system from timing out. When you select a summative session, it's going to ask you, are you sure that you want to administer a summative test? That way, hopefully it draws attention to it so that summative tests aren't administered in error. But sometimes we do get a little click happy and we don't read that warning. Just be aware of that. You won't see any rosters yet, as the list of students in the session will generate automatically after the test administrator approves students once they've started logging in. So when you first log into that interface, you'll select the test type from the window. All assessments in the test selection window are color coded. The summative ones are blue, okay? The available tests are organized into categories, just like they're shown on this screen. You can then click the little plus sign next to any category name to view the tests in that category to more accurately open a test session for a very specific grade or a specific subject area. To create this test session, you'll click the test that you want to administer, okay? And then when you click that little checkbox, the test name is going to populate then on the right-hand side, so that if you misselect anything, you can always clear it out or hit the little gray X and reselect the test that you meant. Once you've selected the test you are intending to administer, you'll click the Start RISE Live Test Session green button that appears at the bottom. And once you do that, the system is going to automatically generate a session ID. The session ID is going to appear at the top of the test interface and alongside the stop button. The ID needs to be provided for students or they can't log in. You may want to write it on the board. That way it's just easily erased. You could also provide it on a printed card. If you do that though, again, just be sure to collect them and destroy them when the session is complete. You should also note that the session ID, you might want to keep it for your own records just in case you accidentally close your browser. You can actually enter that same session ID and it will allow you to resume the same session if you closed it inadvertently. If you don't have this particular session ID, if you inadvertently closed it, you would have to start a new session, okay? If you closed it. When students start signing into the test session, an approvals button is then going to appear next to the session ID. And once you approve students for testing, the test session table is going to appear in the center, displaying student names, information, and their testing progress. And we're going to look at that more in the next few slides. In the banner that appears at the top, you're going to see a set of buttons and your username. Okay, you'll see click student lookup. This is to search for student login information. You can also verify if a student's login credentials are correct. There's the click approved requests. This is going to allow you to view a list of student print requests that you may need to approve during a testing session. There is the click print session, which will allow you to print a screenshot of the test administration interface with that session ID on it. There's the click help guide option to access any additional information. And then there's the alerts to view messages that might be sent by USB-E. And then there's the logout button to exit the interface. Yes, George, the session still will time out after 20 minutes if it is inactive. The approvals spot is really the most important piece to be aware of here. If you notice, there's a little red number 1 next to it in this screenshot. That tells me that I have 1 student waiting for approval, and you'll watch that number increase as students get logged into the secure browser. Just know they can't access any test questions until you hit the approval button. So this is especially important for like the Math 6 test, as once students finish the first part of the test, they actually have to sign back into the second section or the second portion of the test, which is going to require the teacher to approve their entrance to the test again to that segment 2. If a student's having trouble logging in, you can use the student lookup feature to verify that the login credentials are correct. You can either use the quick search or the advanced search options to view the information for the student in Tide. With quick search, you just simply enter the SSID. With the advanced search, it allows you to narrow it down using several other filters, like your LEA, school, grade, first name, last name, those types of things. If you're going to use either of these, if a search results in a match, the information is going to appear at the bottom of the window. And if there's no match, you'll actually see an error message. If you see the student you're looking for, you can click the little eye icon button that's next to the student name. A new window is going to display the student information that kind of appears on the testing ticket. Okay, just note that the information displayed may vary slightly from what's shown here. If there are no issues to take care of, you can begin approving student entry to the test. It is very important that you pay close attention to the test name prior to approval, just to be sure that students have selected the appropriate test, right? To approve students for testing, you can click the green check boxes one at a time that's next to the individual names, or you can approve all students with the option that's at the top of the screen. This is also nice because you can ensure that Spanish adaptive setting, as well as all other accommodations, have been set by clicking that little eye and scrolling to the presentation tab to confirm language selection, again, or any other accommodation. So you can check this before the student even sees it. If the student test settings are incorrect for any reason, the settings need to be updated in Tide before the student can take the test. If it's a Tide thing, you will need to contact a school testing coordinator or the district testing coordinator, which is most of you, to have those updated. So teachers might be reaching out to you if they feel that something is amiss or that something wasn't set correctly. They're going to need you to change that before the student can access the test, okay? You can also deny approval for if the student's just in the wrong session, if the demographic information is incorrect. Just know that denying the student entry to the test is not going to prevent other approved students from beginning their tests. And that if a student's test settings are incorrect, they can't be changed when the student is actively testing, which is why you would need to deny them entry so that those can be changed before having them log back in for approval. Okay. So once students are logged in and approved, yes.
Sorry, just a question, just because it has happened in the past. Let's say an accommodation got missed. The kid gets a couple questions in, is like, hey, I can't get my Spanish thing to work, or hey, I was supposed to have this. Can they be removed from the session, update that accommodation, and then resume the test?
Yes, but you don't even have to remove them from the session. They just need to be logged out of the system.
Okay, so they can pause or whatever, log out, we can update that accommodation, and then they could resubmit, enter the code in, be reapproved in, and
Yes,
that accommodation would kick off.
yes.
Elise, I would add one thing to that. Specifically for Braille and Spanish, if a student starts, say a student needs Spanish, if the test is in English, they get a few questions in. In that case, you would actually need to reset the test, specifically for the
Okay,
language
sorry.
settings. Yeah, specifically for language settings, they actually on the back end serve up a different version of the test. So if a student's already started the English test, they would actually have to restart into like the Spanish version of the test. So specifically for the language settings, you do need to, if you get a few questions and realize, you need to have the student exit the test and then have the test reset and then set the accommodations properly.
Thank you for clarifying. Trevor, does that help?
Yeah, I had a student once that I missed the Spanish thing and it caused all sorts of headaches. And I had to get our district to help me reset everything.
Okay. All right, so once you're on this particular screen, once students have gotten logged in, you can monitor their status from the tables that are displayed. So you can see student information, you can see the opportunity, which for the summative test is going to be 1. You can see the test they're taking, the progress. So the cool thing with the progress column is it displays the student's progress through the items in the test. So it's going to move a little bit further along as the student moves a little bit further along. Okay. If TDS detects that a student might be having some technical issues or requires assistance, a little test with potential issues table is actually going to appear above your tests without issue table. And then a little more info icon will appear in the test status column. If you hover over that little icon, it's going to display more information. This happens if students request like a printout. It also happens if a student's test is timed out. Okay. That those will move to the top so that it draws your attention to them as a proctor. The print on request feature is available only for students who require it. If you feel you have a student who needs that accommodation, school test coordinators would need to be contacted. Okay. Students with this accommodation can request printouts of stimuli or items. It just kind of depends on their settings. When a student sends a print request, the printer button is going to appear in the actions column with that test with potential issues, just again to draw your attention to it. And you can click the button to view the request. If you click the check button to approve it, a cover sheet containing the student's name and SSID is going to display in a new browser window. Okay, no test content is ever going to display on your screen. And you can just click print in the new window and OK to request your printer. But before approving any student print request, just ensure that it's going to be sent to a printer that's monitored by staff who've been trained in test security, because those printed items and reading passages still need to be securely stored and destroyed immediately following any testing session. The approved requests button allows you to view a list of every print request that you've approved during the current session. If you want to print a list for your own records, you can do that. If you wish to print a snapshot of the test administration interface in its current view, so it would show which students have completed, how far along they are. It shows your session information. You can print that screen. Okay, this is useful for tracking when students didn't complete their test and might need to be scheduled for another testing session. It might be necessary to set your page layout to landscape or adjust margins, so just kind of be aware of that if you choose to do that. And then remember that any printouts containing any personally identifiable student information need to be securely stored and destroyed after use. You have 2 options within the interface to pause or stop testing once it's begun. So you can pause an individual student's test. You can also stop the entire session. To pause an individual test, you just click the pause button in the little actions column. Okay. When prompted, you click OK to confirm that you want to pause the test. This option is appropriate, like if a student becomes ill or in the event of an emergency that requires all students to stop testing, you can actually pause all of the tests by just stopping the session. If you stop the session, all of the in progress tests are just going to pause. And if a session stops, it can't be resumed. You're just going to open another one. You're going to create a new test session and give a new session ID, and students are going to be able to pick up right where they left off. They'll just resume where it was paused. Okay. If you need to do that, you just click the stop button next to the session ID and a pop-up message is going to appear, just asking for verification. Also, if you forgot to log out before leaving the testing area, the session is going to automatically close after 20 minutes of inactivity. So you would then also need to create a new session if you were coming back after that 20-minute mark. In the event that you need to transfer the monitoring and management of your session to a different device, you can transfer any active session from one device or a browser to another without having to stop it or interrupt student progress. Do you have a question? We good? Okay. This is a useful scenario, like if your computer malfunctions or if your laptop battery is going to die, if you accidentally close the browser while a session is in progress. So to transfer the session, you do need to have that active session ID, which is probably written on a board or printed out on a little card, because your session is going to remain open until it times out. If you don't return to that active session in the 20 minutes and there's no student activity, it's going to log you out and pause all of the tests. Okay. But if you are quick enough, 20 minutes is plenty of time. But if you need to move it, you don't need to log out or stop the session. You just need to, while the session is still active, sign into the test administration site on a different device and just enter the session ID prompt that appears. And that will allow you to transfer an active session, again, like I said, to another device. If another proctor is taking over, or again, if your laptop battery is going to die, anything like that. And then it doesn't stop the session or pause the students. It just seamlessly continues. So there's no interruption in the testing if students are actively testing during that session that needs to move. When it's time to log out, it's pretty simple. You just click the log out button in the upper right corner of the page. It is preferred for you to log out after stopping your session, because logging out is going to cause any test that's in progress to pause. A confirmation page is going to appear, just asking you, are you sure you want to exit the website? Just know that student data is not lost when you do this, okay? So if you end up, again, like closing it inadvertently, as long as you reopen with the same session, you're good to go. If you need to access another website while testing, we just encourage you to open it in a separate browser window so that it doesn't interfere with testing that might be going on.
I have a question.
Okay.
In the past, it has been that if you pause a test for any amount of time, well, no, excuse me, that's not right. If you stop a test and have to start a new session of the same test, students cannot go back to previous questions. Is that still the case?
Yes, if it's past the 20-minute pause rule. We're actually going to hit on that in just a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
And provide you a little more detail. Yep. This table presents some of the common issues that you or your students might encounter during a testing session. Just take a moment to just kind of review it a little bit. There's significantly more that are included in the test administration manual, but this just gives you a quick glimpse of what you should do if a test, like when a test session ends, or if a student's test freezes. Just those simple things that are a little more common when that require possibly some troubleshooting. All right, so this is the secure browser student interface. So this is what students will see when they open the secure browser. You'll notice there's a place for them to put first name, their SSID, and then the session ID, which is that live code. Students need to use the secure browser to log in. It's designed to ensure test security by prohibiting students from accessing any other programs or websites during testing. Your school's tech coordinator is responsible for ensuring that the secure browser has been correctly installed on all testing devices. So if you have questions about installation of the secure browser, just make sure to contact your technology coordinator. To log into the online testing system, students need to use the secure browser on a separate computer or device than the one that's being used by the teacher or the proctor. When they enter their information and it's complete, they can sign in. A teacher can assist students when logging in if necessary. If students are having difficulty logging in, an error message or code might display on the login screen. The most common error occur when a student's first name or SSID don't match what's in the system, or when SSIDs are entered incorrectly. So if a student receives an error message indicating that they've entered incorrect information in the first name or the SSID fields, you can use the student lookup tool that we looked at. Another common error is when students enter the incorrect session ID. I've seen it also where they put a space instead of a letter. So just kind of double checking those things are easy ways to troubleshoot if students are having difficulty logging in. After logging in, students need to complete just a few more steps before they begin testing. They're going to be asked to view and verify their personal information. If it's correct, they can click yes and proceed. If it's incorrect, please instruct them to click no. This is important because some students have the same first and last names, and the grade and the SSID really need to match. And we need to make sure that students are taking the correct test. So if a student looks at it and goes, this doesn't look like me, it really might not be. And so have them click no, double check their credentials. You probably want to even contact your school testing coordinator and just have the students' information updated in Tide before they log in again. On the Your Test screen, after they've logged in, students are going to see a list of assigned tests for this session. They would need to select the test that is being administered. Just as a heads up, this screenshot is a training test one, so just know that the summative one is going to look a tiny bit different. A lot of times with summative administration, there's only one test for them to select, which is great because then you know that it's not being administered inadvertently. After the test administrator has approved students for a test session, the students are going to see screens that allow them to choose settings. This is going to allow them to make any changes if they chose to the display. Okay. Teachers can also read the required scripts that are located in the TAM at this point in time to guide students through the login and confirmation process. After verifying their test, students are going to proceed through a series of functionality checks to make sure that their device is functioning properly. This allows them to test audio and video, and they can click through if those things are working appropriately. These are great because it allows the students to check their headphones before actually getting into the test itself. So I would recommend another quick, really easy troubleshooting thing that we see a lot is just be sure to push the headphone cord in all the way, because sometimes they don't get pushed in all the way. And it's just as simple as that, just double checking that the headphones cord has been pushed all the way in. Next, students are going to review information about the tools and navigation features that they have access to. The test settings section allows students to view their current test settings. The additional test information section lists any other additional information that's necessary for students to know. The help guide contains an overview of the testing site, some testing rules, information on text-to-speech and print-on-request features. And then there's the begin test now. And when the student clicks that, they are then going to be presented with the first question of their test. Before we look at the test interface, I just want to draw your attention to the global tools and other features that are going to be available for students to use during testing. We're going to look at all of these tools and features in detail on the following slides. But know that these global tools that are here on the left are available for any student. It's the ones on the right, the assistive technology, that would require state approval. And just another plug here for Tracy, any questions regarding the assistive technology can be directed to her. So with our global tools, you'll notice there are arrows at the top left. Those are there for students to use when advancing back and forth between questions. And the other available tools appear in the upper right, with some in collapsible hamburger style menus on the question or the cluster itself. The notepad appears in the item specific hamburger dropdown. Students can use the notepad to make notes about an item. The notepad is item specific. So when the student navigates away from this question, anything's in this little notepad are going to still appear on that particular question. They're not going to appear on the next one. Notes that we'll look at next is different. Test items with notes are going to display throughout your test. So the notes tool is not item specific. Anything the student types into this section is going to be available throughout their entire test. These notes are saved and continue to be accessible for later segments, even in a segmented test. The notes are also retained if the student logs out of the test and resumes later. To use the highlighter tool, you can either select the desired text and right-click and then just select the highlight section, or you can find it in the item-specific hamburger drop-down menu that comes with the stimulus. To remove highlighting, the student would then need to right-click in the area and select the reset highlight button that pops up. If a student pauses the test, any highlighting that's made before pausing will also be retained. Students can use the strike-through tool to help them visually eliminate any answers they believe are incorrect or that they wish to ignore. To do this, they can right-click on the text of the answer they want to mark and select strike-through. The answer text is then going to display with a line through it. To remove that strike-through, they can just right-click and click the undo strike-through button that pops up. It's important to note, though, that the strike-through of the answers doesn't indicate a response to the question. The student still needs to select a response. So if it's like a 4-answer question, like a multiple choice, just because they've eliminated 3 answers doesn't mean that it's automatically selecting the one that's left. In the similar vein, applying the strike-through tool doesn't prevent the student from selecting that response as an answer either. So they need to just kind of be careful with their clicks. Another element of the online test which is helpful for students is the mark for review feature. As students go through a summative test, students are required to answer each question on the screen before they can go on. So if they aren't sure with a question, they should provide what they think is the best answer, but they can then mark that item or other items for review using the little flag. To mark an item for review, you just use the hamburger drop-down menu from the item and select mark for review. And then the item number is going to display a little doggy ear in the corner, like that little like folded corner, and a small flag. And that way students can go back and just kind of double check those when they're finished. At any time during a test segment, students can go back to those marked items within the segment and review or change their answers as needed. To unmark the item, the student just selects the unmarked review item from the same drop-down. It's important to note that once students have completed a test segment, in a test that prohibits like navigation between previous segments, like the 6th grade math one, for example, or if the test is paused for more than 20 minutes, returning to items that are marked for review is not going to be allowed. However, that 20-minute rule does not apply to the cluster style questions that you see in the science test. During testing, students can use the zoom feature to increase the size of text and graphics. Note that this is different than magnification that is applied through assistive devices. So just kind of know that there is a difference between the two. An English glossary feature is available for students in grades 3 through 5 on reading passages during testing. They can access the glossary just by clicking on any of the pre-selected terms. They're going to be indicated on the screen with a gray dotted outline. And when the student hovers a mouse over one of those terms, it's going to highlight in blue. And if a student clicks the highlighted term, a little pop-up box is going to appear with a definition of that word. And then the student can just return to the item by clicking the X in the upper right-hand corner to close the definition box. The masking tool allows students to cover up any distracting area of the test page. They can click the masking button and then click and drag their mouse to select a rectangular area on the screen. And once they've covered the portion they want to cover, they can also deactivate masking mode by clicking the masking button again. Those masked areas are going to remain on the screen even after masking mode is deactivated. If they want to remove it, though, it's super easy. They just click the little X in the upper right corner of the masked area, and that grade rectangle is going to go away. The Select Previous Version tool allows students to view and restore responses that they've previously entered or saved in a text response item. To use this tool, students are going to open the context menu for a text response item and just click Select Previous Version, and the window is going to appear and list any saved responses for the item and the text that was associated with them. So to view those previous responses, they just select a response version in the left panel, and then they can read and review any of the associated text in the right panel. To restore one of those responses, the student just then selects the select button at the bottom, and then that will be the text that appears. Just know that the select previous version tool is not going to restore responses that were entered prior to pausing a test. If a student has the Spanish adaptive version of the math or science test enabled in Tide, this little world icon is going to appear with the other global tools in the right area of the screen. And then this is where the student can then toggle between the presented language of English and Spanish. Okay. If your school plans to test over multiple days, you may wish to have students pause their tests at a certain point so that they can resume testing at another time. You may also allow a pause if a student is taking a break from testing or if they need to leave the room for any reason, called to the office, checking out, those types of things. Whether they've been instructed to do so or not, students though can choose to pause their test at any time by clicking the pause button that's there in the upper left corner. And when they do this, a little pop-up is going to ask them to confirm that they really want to pause, and they can confirm or deny their own pause of the test. So pausing of tests, we had a couple of questions about this earlier, and we did a little bit of clarification, but now we're going to get into more detail. So if you were one of those people that had a pausing test question, when it comes to pausing tests, rules do apply. For all tests that have been paused for less than 20 minutes, students can return from that short break in testing and revisit any item in the segment and change their answers if desired. Okay. Students taking all tests except writing who have paused their tests for longer than 20 minutes may only return to the most recently visited page that's going to contain unanswered test items in the current test segment. They can change any answers present on the page, but they're not going to have access to any items on previous pages. If all items on the most recently visited page were answered prior to pausing, the student is going to resume the test on the next page with unanswered items and not allowed to access the previous pages or the segment of the test. Again, the exception to this is writing, because writing tests can be revisited at any time. Okay. On a related note, as a security measure, after 20 minutes of test inactivity, students are going to be logged out and their tests are going to be paused automatically. Inactivity is determined by whether or not the student is interacting with the test. So selecting answers, using navigation tools, those types of things. Clicking empty space on the screen is not considered activity. So students are going to receive a warning message prior to being logged out, and they need to click OK in the little pop-up that will appear within 60 seconds to avoid being automatically logged out and the pausing of their test. If a student's test is paused due to inactivity, the same rules apply as when the student intentionally paused the test. They can still log back in and resume from the point that they were testing, subject to the pause rule as applicable. So if it's within the 20 minutes, they'll still be able to go back and review anything that they had access to previously. Additionally, if a screensaver is activated during testing, the security breach feature is going to log the student out of the test. So to avoid any interruption, schools should either deactivate any screensavers before students start testing, or ensure that screensavers are set to a longer period of time that's going to be the allocated testing time. Something to be aware of specific to the Math 6 test, it has 2 segments. So when students reach the end of their first test segment, they're going to receive a warning message asking them to confirm that they really are ready to move on to the second segment. The warning also advises that they cannot return to change their answers in the current segment once they've moved on. Test administrators should ensure that students understand the outcome of ending test segment 1 before moving on to test segment 2 in that situation. Just encourage students to check their answers before moving on. And then the test administrator will need to approve the student before they can enter the second segment of the test, because it does include the calculator as a global tool for the statistics, probability, and geometry sections. When students answer the final question of the test, the end test button is going to appear in the upper left area of the screen, along with a message advising them that the test had been completed and is ready to be submitted. That end test button does not become visible until the student has selected at least one response to every question on the test. So if a student is ready to end and that little button doesn't appear, odds are they have a question that is somehow unanswered. If students click the next button at this point, they're going to see a pop-up message advising them to click the end test button when they've completed their reviewing their answers. And then they can also click the back button to go back and just revisit previous items if they chose to. Okay, again, that's subject to the pause rule. Okay, for writing tests though, test administrators should be aware that students have completed the entire task before submitting that test or hitting that end test button. If students are taking a break during the writing test, whether it's just for a few minutes or a few days, they need to pause the test, not end the test. Because the end test button is going to appear on the screen as soon as the student begins typing the answer to their prompt. Okay, but we don't want them to end the test for the writing test unless they're ready. They can pause it, but end is really the submit option with that writing test. So when students are truly ready to end, they should click the end test button, and a pop-up's going to ask them to select yes if they're ready and no if they're not. If the student selects no, it's going to return them to the last item on the test, and they can still continue to revisit previous items. If the student clicks yes, they're going to be taken to a review screen where they have the choice to review their answers or submit their test. Their ability to review and change answers is subject to the pause rule if applicable for this for the test. Okay. Students who are ready to submit their test should click submit to finish, and they will receive a confirmation pop-up message asking if they are sure they want to submit. Clicking no is going to again refer them back to the review screen. Clicking yes is going to take them to the test completion page, which shows a message indicating that the test was successfully submitted and advises the student to log out. This is also a great time to have some set procedures in place. Like if you want students to notify the teacher before submission, the TAM has specific directions for ending tests. So if you have a Click Happy Kiddo who submits a writing test before they're finished, it can be reopened, but you have to go through a little bit of a process to do so. It's important to also note that testing opportunities expire. So if the test opportunity isn't completed within the allotted time frame, it's going to expire, meaning the student will no longer have access to make changes. If a test expires and students need to access it again, you'll need to file a test request appeal. The TIDE user guide provides information on that. Okay. All right, that was a whole bunch. Test tickets, monitoring process, administering global tools, expiration time. I'm going to open up the chat again, or you can come off mute for questions regarding just like the test administration process.
Could you go back just one slide for the
Just
dates?
go back one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Trevor, let's see, possibly a random question. Let's say hypothetically, not that this ever happens, a student blows through a test and finishes in 2 minutes. Is there cutoff or red flags the state raises or participation code that can be applied for an invalid test due to being impossible to finish the test the amount of time?
I'll answer that for you.
Okay.
Nope. It's one of those things that if a student blows through a test, that's what happens. And that's part of the reason why working with training tests, giving benchmark modules through the year, talking about students about how you use the data, all of that. That's why it has to happen, but that's what happens. Their score's the score. Now, on a good note, Trevor, because this always stresses everyone out. And as a teacher, I remember what it was like. I only had about 5 kids ever do that back in the day. And remember that one student doing this in your class is not going to destroy your averages or your test. And you're going to remember, and the odds are probably that this is a student that you probably, I used to call them my squirrels. You probably are aware that this was your squirrel, and so that you can address that when you're discussing results with a parent or something like that. But there is no participation code. That is a complete, once the student has completed 85% of the question of the test, it's completed, actually 6 items there, it's complete. So that's kind of how that works. And they're allowed to go over benchmarks with students, yes. I'm gonna let Elise answer that. That is actually in the TAM, you guys, under exactly how you use benchmarks. Once they've been administered, yep, you can go over them with your class.
And if you want to send me an email, I can get you more information. Just time wise, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but I am happy to walk you through how you can review benchmarks with students.
And Carolyn, absolutely. Strategic seeding and proctor proximity works really good for kids who tend to blow through that. So if you already know that you have some students that are probably going to do that, those are the students that you definitely want to make sure that the proctors, that there are 2 proctors in the room, because it helps with proximity control, especially with students who tend to do that. Now, like I said, it tends to be not as it's not something that happens with every single student and every single test. It's usually once. So that's part of it. So is it ethical to have a testing proctor tell a student they need to slow down and go back if they see? No. The only thing a proctor can tell a student is they're allowed to use the words in the script and say, have you reviewed your test? But you don't get to go and say, hey, slow down, go back, see what you're doing. That is not standardized procedure. So it is not appropriate. So that's why when you do training tests or you give a benchmark module and you go over it with students in the class, you talk about what's the proper way to take tests like this. And that's why, so that when they do the summative test, they're already prepared and they already know how to do a test and what the expectations are in the classroom. So if that helps. And that's one of the things that's just part of testing ethics. I may be adding some more stuff to the testing ethics policy. I think we've got some questions like this in there, but I will add some of those in there. But no, it is absolutely unethical to have a proctor tell them slow down, go back through. You just have to sit there and hold your breath. Unfortunately,
I have the opposite issue where I have students and teachers. The teachers let the students sit there and they take 4+ hours for a test. And I keep telling them that isn't an extent. If the student does not have an extended time limit, when do we cut them off?
Here's the key with RISE. It's an untimed test. So a teacher letting a student take 4 hours to complete a test is questionable, because the thing that you may want to discuss with teachers, and when you look in the TAM and we talk about maximum testing times, it's not a timed test, but we have done years of study and lots of review, and that is that the students who take 4 hours to complete a test actually start scoring worse after those recommended times.
And
so
we've gone over that and it's just like,
yep, I know.
So
It's just
when they get to me when I'm doing makeups and what do I like?
So can I jump in with just a thought, Kim?
Sure.
Only because I went through this with my kiddos, right? And when I was in the resource classroom, and for me, my indicator was when they stalled out, right? If they're sitting there, they're not making progress, they're not moving along. That's kind of your indication that you're not getting any benefit from that continued time. But if they're still working through it and they're working through it and they're moving forward, right? And it's just taking them longer, then I think you just have to know the kids and you have to kind of monitor with what they're doing.
So can we just, if they finish 6 questions and they've only got to question number 15, they're not continuing to work, can we just call it good and let them submit that score, or do we keep trying until they finish?
I think it's going to depend on your kid. I mean, Kim can feel free to jump in, but I mean, if they're stalled out and they're done and they're like, I don't know anymore, I can't do anymore, you're not getting anywhere. I mean, if you're answering 1 question an hour.
Because that's what I get when they come to me. By the time they've already had 5 sessions with the teacher and they're coming to me and they still are only halfway through a test. And they're not really doing anything.
What we do in Salt Lake
Go ahead.
is if the kids hit that they pass that time and a half and are starting, you know, and kind of in that window between time and a half to double time, the teacher has to call me and so I can approve, so I know which kids are taking longer, and we have that conversation of, are the kids actively working or are they counting the holes in the ceiling tile?
Okay.
If they're actively and they're, you know, I've got this, I'm really trying, I can do this, then let them keep going. But if they're done, then there's that point to let them be done. The other thing that we do and put out all the time is, you know your kids, and one of the nice things about Rise is you can pause at any time. And so if you have, you know, those squirrely kids or a student down on the way to the test session and it's just not a good day to test, don't test them that day. Don't put the teacher or the child in a situation where people have to cry. You know, if you have to pause or like if you've got your whole class in a session and all of a sudden the sun comes out and the kids start looking out the window, you can stop a session at 20 minutes and come back later. You know, make those adjustments so that the kids have that best opportunity.
And it's the same thing as, like, for example, if you're giving a test and it's time for recess, you know, we pause the test, people go out and have recess and they come back. You know, it can be exactly the same thing. It's hard to give specific guidance about this, as Tracy said. Part of that is because it is really individualized to students. What Terralyn does has worked really well over the years. I'll put a plug in for Terralyn because that has worked really well for them. And that's part of what that happens. You know, when you get to that point, you can just say, it looks like you might need a break. Let's go ahead and pause the test. And that's okay to say. It's not okay to stand there and say, you're taking too long, please hurry up. It's not, you know, or please slow down, you're going too fast. Those kind of things are what. And we don't put the stuff like that in the TAM because they're individualized situations. And we don't want every teacher reading to say, the problem with that giving approved phrases is the minute we do that, then teachers start reading them to every single student. And then you have a whole nother level with that. So that's part of what that happens. And it's an individualized thing. So that's kind of how that works, because these are very individualized situations. This doesn't happen with every single student. And that's why it's a standardized test. And then you have the kids who are not standard. So we have to toe a fine line. We wish that we could just tell everybody every single thing to say in everything single situation, but that's part of where that practice comes in. So.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, guys, we feel your pain. I mean, Lisa and I and Tracy will tell you, it hasn't been that long since we were in the classroom asking exactly the same questions of everyone else. And that's one reason why we try to provide as much guidance as we possibly can. And that's part of it. Yeah. And Michelle talking about that middle school kids who are advanced in math, that they seem to take a long time. They do well because they take a lot of time. As you know, Michelle, you know, because, you know, we've worked together so long, those are the kids you already know. And that's where not having a lot of individualized information is in there. So you give them some time, you give them enough time to complete. That's how that works. But they're actively working, as Terralyn said. There's a difference between actively working and sitting there and staring at the computer. So that's kind of how that works.
And I could tell the difference between my kids, right? Like, oh, okay, you're done. Thank you. Submit it, move on. There's no argument, right? Like then there's those that weren't, you know, and, you know, I guess if you've got kiddos in that extended time and they are students, you know, on an IEP, and if they land to you after testing session number 5, because they can't complete, one of the considerations that the IEP team should be having a conversation around if they are on an IEP is, maybe we just need to do alternate location to begin with, right? If that's going to be a more comfortable setting and you think you're going to get through content. So those would be conversations to take back to an IEP team if you've got those situations happening.
Okay, great discussion. Thank you for those questions. Last but not least, we're going to look at reporting. This is where you're going to find your student results. When you log into the reporting system, the first thing you see is the dashboard where you will, you can view overall assessment results for all of your assessments listed by assessment. Teachers can also view a list of their students. The dashboard generator allows the user to determine which types of test groups they would like to start with, as well as being able to default these selections for subsequent logins. The screen also allows for a quick search for specific SSIDs, as well as changing various settings in the features and tools menu, like changing reporting time period so that you can look at historical RISE data, downloading student results, and as well as all sorts of other functionality. It's important to note that the teacher dashboard and the school or LEA level dashboard is going to look slightly different. Users can see overall test results directly from the dashboard page. This screen also shows the filters panel that's just on the left side of the table. It expands to show options that are available to the user. If you're not initially seeing the information you believe you should be seeing, check your filters. Oftentimes it's just because they are set to a specific data set, which could be excluding what you're looking for. You can view performance by roster or by student using the tabs across the top. We're going to start with roster and then we'll move on to student in a bit. The first two fields show the course and teacher, and then the next columns show student count. So that's like the number of students who took each test, the completion rate, which is how many students are currently finished, the average score and performance distribution, and then percent proficient. The average score column lists the average raw score for the assessment, and then the performance distribution column shows the student's level of achievement based on mastery of standards. And you can use the little gray triangles across the top to sort by student count or completion rate, as well as scale score. Because summative assessments have reporting category sections, you can compare performance of your schools in each reporting category. You just click each colored vertical section bar to expand or collapse it. In this example, you can view a performance distribution bar for each roster under the reporting category. And then when making comparisons, just be careful to take student count into consideration just to determine the value of the comparison that you're trying to make. For summative assessments, you can also view strength and weaknesses for reporting categories in the performance by roster tab. The strength and weakness designations compare an individual school's performance on a specific standard with the overall performance on a test. So on each line, the comparison is relative to the individual student and utilizes various symbols to provide just a quick overview of the performance. It's important to note that performance items cannot be seen at any level with a summative assessment. Users can only see the strength or weaknesses at those aggregate levels. If a plus sign is shown, it's an area of strength. If the equal sign is shown, it means that performance on the standard is similar to performance on the test as a whole. And then if a negative sign is shown, it's an area of weakness. If the asterisk is shown, it indicates that there is insufficient information to determine. This information can also be accessed on a more granular level by teachers for their own rosters and students that are specifically assigned to them. When viewing performance by student, the first two fields now show student names and SSIDs, and then the next columns show scale scores and performance distribution, as well as percent proficient. You'll notice those same colored vertical section bars will expand and provide more information regarding that particular standard. One of the other features included in the features and tools waffle menu is the breakdown by button. This allows you to compare performance by subgroups that are represented. You can make your selections and then move down to the download student results to export that information in either like a PDF or a zip or CSV files, and those go to your secure inbox when they're ready. The download student results box is also where you can print your ISRs. You can print them from the screen using just a little print icon there. It's important to know that the summative assessments are going to fall into these reporting categories. When you click the little eye icon, this performance level table will show up, and it also shows the range for the scale score, which correlate to the proficiency level, okay? When reviewing and interpreting student score information on the RISE summative writing assessment, know that there are 3 categories that student responses are scored on. And the ISR is going to identify the genre of the writing prompt that the student received. But due to item security, specific information about which prompt the student received is not going to show up, okay? The performance level standards are used to classify writing as follows. You've got below standard, at or near, and then above. To generate and view or export ISRs for a writing assessment, you just use the student results generator, and each ISR shows a student performance. And then the student results generator is going to present a series of panels to select the options, and just depending on what page you start from, some options might be pre-selected. Okay, you just select the applicable boxes for the subject, the grade, and the test, and then select the students for the either by roster or individual. So you can do an entire roster or just a selection, or I can even enter a specific SSID in the search bar. From the to report type options in the panel on the right, you can select the option for the ISR. Okay, if you are going to generate your ISRs, again, you have 3 weeks to do that post testing. Do we have questions on reporting? Yes, Vanessa, we are going to share the presentation. Emily will get it sent out by the end of the week for sure. Okay, if we're not have questions for reporting, we can go on to the test appeals process. Test appeal requests are a way of interrupting kind of the normal flow of test submission to the reporting. For example, a student may need to go back into a segment they incorrectly exited, or have a grace period extension if they had to pause their test and didn't have time to review. A test administrator may want to invalidate a test because of an issue with academic dishonesty, anything like that. So to create a test appeal request, you're going to access TIDE. These need to be submitted at least 1 day prior to the end of the testing window so that the student still has the opportunity to complete the test. Okay. Once it's been requested, LEA level users have to review the request and then either process or deny it, because there's a myriad of test appeals to choose from. So as you're deciding which type of appeal to create or review, it's important to understand that if you invalidate the test, it actually eliminates the testing opportunity completely. It no longer will appear as an opportunity for the student. So become familiar with the descriptions, because you might just want to reopen a test. You create the test appeal request by selecting that option from the menu, select the request type, and then select search. TIDE's going to display the results at the bottom of the page. You just mark the checkbox for each result that you want the appeal applied to. From the select a reason dropdown, you can select a reason for creating the appeal request. And the reason, they could be varied based on the appeal request type, but you need to enter a reason for the request that pops up and then select submit. As an LEA level user, you can then approve or reject that appeal. For what it's worth, you can also view, retract, and export existing appeal requests. From the appeal request task menu on the TIDE dashboard, you just have to select view, approve, export, and then that page is going to appear. You can retrieve the appeal requests you want to by filling out the search criteria and select search. You may want to review the reason for the appeal request just by selecting the little green quotation button that appears in the request status column. And then to approve, you select the appeal to be approved, click the process button when you're ready, and then you just follow that same procedure. The computer is advancing for me. That's tricky. To complete the appeal, the request needs to be reviewed and then processed. So I would recommend checking for those appeals at least weekly during the testing window, just to keep on top of them. There's also guidance included in the TIDE user guide, starting on page 129. It's important to monitor test progress and enter participation codes throughout the entire window, rather than just waiting till everything's done. You can begin your cleanup as testing is going through. It's in the data cleanup menu. The discrepancy resolution page allows LEA level users to view and clean up test discrepancies where students were eligible for a test in a given school year but didn't take it. So you can then clean up that data by entering participation codes as applicable for the students who appear on the discrepancy resolution report. The steps for how to complete this process are kind of as follows here. First, you just need to fill out the fields given in the desired boxes and hit search. The results of the search are going to be generated showing the students within the search criteria with any discrepancies. So it's going to be those who were eligible for a summative test at any point and haven't started. Next, you can select the tools icon button to resolve the discrepancy. Then the resolve discrepancy page is going to appear. You just need to select the edit pencil and put in the codes as necessary. As a reminder, you should be entering participation codes for students throughout the window. You don't want to wait until just testing cleanup to do it all at once. Okay, if you're waiting until after testing is all the way done for cleanup, you're going to have a lot more than you probably want. And as a reminder, I believe that all participation codes need to be submitted by June 12th. I want to check that though, but I think it's June 12th. Kim or Eric might know for sure, but I would want to double check that. Starting with our spring summative administration, so March 14th, LEA level users can now add non-participation codes for multiple students in a single upload. This is another enhancement that I know many of you are going to be so excited about. You'll just need to enter all of the SSIDs and the corresponding non-participation codes into an Excel or CSV file. The templates are downloadable from Tide, and upload the entire file to Tide in one action. Just note that this task requires some familiarity with CSV files or working with Excel. More guidance is included in the Tide manual starting on page 145, but I'm going to outline the process for you here. You'll upload your file with the SSIDs and their corresponding non-participation codes. If you've not saved the template upload on your device, you'll need to download one, just like any other Tide upload file. And then the template upload file is pre-configured with the RISE assessments and the applicable non-participation codes. Okay. You then preview the file, and any errors in the upload are going to be flagged in the validation step. A common error is seen here is going to occur when trying to apply a non-participation code to a test that a student's not eligible to take. These errors are going to need to be fixed before you upload the revised file for those changes to be reflected. Okay, it is that simple and a nice bulk way to upload your non-participation codes. If at any time during your process you need help or support, you can email or call the RISE help desk. They're fantastic. The hours of operation do change during the summative window. You are also welcome to email me at any time or call. I'm happy to help however I can. Do we have any questions relating to test appeals or data cleanup? I can see in the chat that data cleanup is, yes, June 12th. Perfect. Any other questions for test appeals, data cleanup, or anything that's come up?
The one thing I'll add that I typed in the chat and it kind of disappeared when it comes to test appeals. At the beginning of the testing window, when it first starts, probably looking at test appeals weekly is probably sufficient. But I would start maybe making that part of your daily routine when you come in. You know how some people come in and check to see who's still left to test. I would start checking those as quickly as possible, because one of the things that you need to do, remember is that sometimes they are just test reopens. And if somebody needs you to reopen a test and you wait until after the window's closed, you can't do that. And so now a student can't complete a test. So that's part of it.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things that, you know, test discrepancy. And yes, Christine, we talk about this in the AD meeting. The closer it gets for discrepancy, we're giving you the high level one right now, and that's why it doesn't show right now. It doesn't show until the spring summative window opens, if I remember right. Isn't that? I think it clicks.
Yes, it's got to be after the window opens.
Yeah, so that's why you can't see it right now. And once it opens again, probably in the March, I'll commit at least to probably reviewing this again, both in the March and the April and the May AD meetings, so that you'll be able to see it. And we always provide like the similar information for that, for those of you who are new, who have had to do this before. So that's part of it. So those are great questions, Christine. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Kim.
Homer, I don't believe there is a course ID for tomorrow. It would be a Zoom link that's sent out to ADs. Any other questions? I'm happy to stay on. If you need anything, my contact information is also up on that last slide. The recording is usually up in the next couple of days, Teresa. It just really depends on how long it takes to get the recording rendered. And then where we have AD meeting, which is also recorded tomorrow, it might be early part of next week. You are welcome. Happy to help. Any other questions?
I have a quick question, and you may have covered this. I had to step away for a second. When you're selecting the type of benchmark, it says post or pre or first test. Are those different? I mean, does it matter what I'm picking? Is that for my own discretion?
For the benchmarks, that's up to you.
Okay. But the summative, that's not an option. I mean, those aren't options.
You don't
Okay.
need that for summative.
Okay, someone was saying that if I pick something different than another classroom, then they're not being compared. They have to be the same pre-test or post, however we mark it.
I think what you're talking about is that if you select pre and then repeat that benchmark somewhere later and select post, I think it graphs the student's progress on the benchmark.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's interesting. All right. Thank you.
Christine, is there a way to get the template for cleanup? That's a really great question. Eric, is there a way to get the template before that blue part appears?
I can look into it. Probably yes, but I do need to look into it since we don't have
Okay.
a system yet.
Cool, thanks. Any other questions? Thank you so much for your attendance and your participation and your questions. If anything comes up, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Kim, or if it's related to accommodations, to Tracy. We're happy to help you, and you are good to go. And we'll see many of you tomorrow at AD meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alice. Have a wonderful day.
You're welcome, you too.
And thank you, Elise, Kim, and Tracy for answering all my questions for me being new. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys. Truly, truly.
No problem. We appreciate your questions. You have really, really good
I
questions.
know, I always ask the hard ones, I think.
I
Which
would
is so
rather,
good.
I would
So good.
rather you ask questions and get the correct answers than try
Yes.
to find them from somebody else and not get the correct answers. So
So,
Every single
so
time.
Tracy, you sent me a link for training that you do for accommodations. And I can see that that's like a thing that we need to probably do in our district. I looked at it before. Is it like 16 people you have to hold one? Is that what it is? Or do you remember?
oh, are you at the bottom of my email?
Yes, because
Oh, that's if you, that's a special ed thing. So if
Yes.
in order to request training, like you fill out that training request, not necessarily, it depends. So if there's something specific you're looking for, you can click on that link in my email and
Well,
fill it out. Like if you want training on, right?
I just know
Accommodations.
that there's a lot of people that are like, we don't know what to do. And so I don't know well, I'm trying to find out what to do because I'm
Do
new.
you need help with teachers, district people, admin? Like what's our target
Admin,
audience?
it's admin, it's our AECs. There's so many new AECs in the buildings that they're like, we don't know. I don't know what this means and why. Anyway,
You can
I
put
just
a
feel,
request in. for
okay,
that.
I will.
Yeah, put a
Yeah.
request in and then they'll kick it to me and just say you want to work with accommodations on assessment for your
Okay.
building administrators, right? Put all that in that we just told me.
Okay.
Give me
Okay.
your name and throw in a couple dates, but they'll kick it to me and I'll just work directly with
And then
you.
you usually do that virtually, yes?
Yeah, we can do that virtually and we can tailor whatever I can tailor anything to whatever
Okay.
anybody needs.
Yeah, I can see that there's a big need, at least, and I again, I'm not an expert at it. So
Yeah.
I can see there's a big need because I'm getting 100 questions about them. They're just like, I
Yeah.
don't know.
So, and then I'll work with you. I mean, just think about some bullet points of exact things you want to hit
Sure.
on, but I have something structured when we get into a training.
Sure.
Right? Is it just RISE? Is it just UA plus? Is it both? What do you want myself and
I
Jessica?
think
So
it's,
just
I
kinda-
think it's everybody. I think it's all of our people, even our elementary folks, like with.
So just think
Katie.
through what your need is and exactly what you would want in the content, right? If it's simply how to go in and assign accommodations, probably not the best use of our time. But if you want to get into like the policy of things or something like that, right? Like if it's something that we can't point you towards a manual and can do some training that way.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate that.
You bet.
And again, you guys are amazing. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. All right, with that, I think we'll close out. And Jerry, you can stop that recording. Thanks so much.
I will see you ladies mañana.
Indeed.
Okay. Thanks, Elise.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy.
Bye.